Hello, my name is Alicia Shapiro with AInews.com, and welcome to another episode of our Driving Tomorrow Conversations with Industry Leaders, where we explore the latest developments and newest innovations in the world of artificial intelligence. Today, I'm excited to speak with Jim Kaskade, the CEO of Conversica, a pioneering company in conversational AI solutions. Conversica has redefined how businesses engage with their customers through revenue digital assistance, enabling marketing, sales, and customer success teams to unlock untapped revenue and build stronger customer relationships. With over a decade of experience in conversational AI and billions of human like interactions, Conversica continues to lead the way in AI driven business transformation. Jim brings a wealth of experience as a senior executive, having successfully grown companies across big data, SaaS, cloud computing, and more, with revenues scaling from $50 million to $1 billion under his leadership. His vision and expertise in AI, analytics, and digital transformation make him a standout leader in the tech industry. In today's interview, we'll explore Jim's insights on the top 3 AI risks facing companies in 2025, like the loss of control, weaponization, and customer trust, as well as discussing the proactive measures of AI companies can take to address these challenges. And we'll also explore how Conversica is setting an example by navigating these risks and Jim's vision for a collaborative, responsible future in AI. So thank you for joining us today, Jim.
Thanks, Alicia. Really have have a lot of talk about, so we're really excited.
Oh, me too. I'm glad that you're here. I'm really looking forward to our chat today. You've previously highlighted that the Terminator Effect as a significant risk for 2025. What specific scenarios do you see this loss of control would occur, and what safeguards would AI companies be implementing to prevent these outcomes?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people, especially the laymen who don't really know much about the technology itself, are going to think Terminator. Read
Yeah,
more about it, right?
they're taking
So
over.
looking over. And I think there's a couple of key factors from a true technology perspective that would drive us closer to a point where AI is in control,
Mhm.
therefore the loss of control a potential issue. And it's one of its the AI itself gets access to more and more data. Data is going to be what makes it more and more intelligent and be able to act on things in real time, but also be able to gather more information to drive its reasoning.
Mhm.
And right now you hear a lot about the fact that it's just there's not a lot of data beyond the training sets that are being used today, and they're creating data sets. But I think that'll change as the AI is now allowed to touch and engage
Mm.
with systems where it can start to use real-time data as its training data set. And I think that's kind of number one. And then number two, giving the AI the ability to act on that in having controls. So going beyond just providing co-pilot type of suggestions to the human race,
Mhm.
literally giving it the ability to take control of something, whether it's mechanical, electrical, or otherwise. And so when you combine those two things, more data and literally being able to take action, then we're on that path. So
Yeah.
what could it do if those two things were to occur? I mean, some of the things that you see in the movies, I think if we broke them down into categories, we would worry about healthcare. We
Mhm.
would worry about diagnostic and treatment, a misdiagnosis,
Mhm.
leading to inappropriate treatments, cascading errors, as it dismisses, conflicting data,
Yeah.
and it causes life-threatening complications. And obviously, you got to give it access to you and your current health and your situation, and you got to give it control over things that could treat you. So that's again two things that would have to happen across those types in that category of healthcare: autonomous air traffic control,
Oh, wow.
autonomous vehicles. Think about conflicting AI instructions, mismanaging the airspace,
Oh
you
my
know,
gosh. Yeah.
overriding pilot corrections, and resulting in midair collisions. I mean, that could be definitely one. Financial algorithmic trading. I mean, gosh, the markets. Obviously, if the AI misinterprets market signals and triggers high volume trades, we know what happens in that scenario, it amplifies volatility.
Yeah.
And it could cause the market to literally crash. So
Right.
that's an interesting one, right? And I think we're all talking about or reading about how AI is consuming a lot of energy,
Hmm.
and we need to create more and more to sustain it. We should probably be putting in as many billions as we do in the infrastructure powering AI as we would put in nuclear power plants or power sources. And so autonomous nuclear power management kind of comes into mind, where the AI misjudges reactor temperatures. And, we've seen reactor meltdowns in the past, haven't we?
Hmm.
For human misjudgments, well, I think the same thing could come from AI that has cascading errors or compounding errors. The air traffic control, the self-driving cars in urban areas, if it misinterprets a pedestrian behavior and creates a fleet-wide disruption, causing accidents, citywide traffic jams, things like
Oh my
that.
gosh.
But then the one that I think is probably one of the most scary is the autonomous military and
Mm.
defense being specifically the area that I would worry about,
Yeah.
where AI misclassifies a non-hostile activity as a threat and escalates responses. And if there's AI on the other side, it'll just, escalate quickly to where you override manual intervention and we lead to unintended, casualties, maybe the end of the world. So I think those are the ones that I would throw out there for all of us to kind of think about from the Terminator Effect perspective.
Yeah. All of those are very scary.
There you
It's
go. I
super
painted a
scary.
picture.
And yet we want more AI agents, like that's what all these big companies are doing with OpenAI and different other ones. They're all creating these AI agents that can take actions on behalf of the humans. And it's like, oh, that sounds great in terms of work. But then when you think about, like you said, with being in charge of healthcare and finance and air traffic control, I'm like, oh my gosh, that is really super scary.
Totally. Yes. And I think generally speaking, you just don't want to put control in the hands of anything without a bit of governance.
Yes.
And the higher the level of risk of, negative effect, the
Hmm.
higher level of governance. Clearly if
True.
it's low in its risk, then you don't have to worry about it as much. And we
Hmm.
have plenty of precedents in terms of categorizing things as unacceptable levels of risk down to really minimal levels of risk. And,
Hmm.
the freedom of the use of technology is unlimited when it's minimal risk.
Yeah.
But I think when it becomes unacceptable is where everybody should at least be in a position to say, yeah, we all agree that we want to highly govern that, right?
Yeah, for sure. Definitely keep the humans involved in a little bit.
Yeah, I think what fundamentally is occurring with these transformer models of today, and I'm going to say today because precedents again in all disruptive technologies, there's a reinvention of it. There's
Hmm.
a quick evolution, and in this case with AI, it's evolved the fastest
Yeah.
compared to other previous disrupting technologies. But with everything like this, it gets improved and iterated on. But
Mm.
current art, as we're all seeing it and experiencing it, the transformer, it processes its input data by converting it into tech terms here, a high dimensional vector space.
Hmm.
And it uses things like you may have read about attention mechanisms and layers to abstract and compress meaningful patterns. So
Yeah.
it's looking for patterns. But what comes from that is a loss of information when you
Mm.
transition from the original data to how these models work with their just weights of parameters, which really means that it focuses on generalization over memorization.
Okay.
It's not going to memorize the detailed facts, and the exactness of the data is really not retained. It's mostly just probabilistic, again, tech terms. And
Hmm.
that means that you're not going to be as deterministic. You're not going to have all the questions in a database of a particular transaction of a bank, withdrawal, these are specific actions that you can recall with 100% accuracy.
Yeah.
And you have to, because I don't want my bank account to all of a sudden miss a bunch of zeros.
Right.
Because it just got a little bit creative. So with large language models, it's not that. It's not deterministic. It's probabilistic. And it means it will come back to you with what it thinks is the right information based on your query, your question, your discussion with it. But it's going to be wrong because it won't have all the detailed data. It's going to have this kind of abstraction of it. So we're expecting something that's not built to be exact. We're expecting it to be exact. And that's just not going to happen. So I think in this world of current transformer technology, GPT, however you want to describe large language models, Gen AI to the general public, or maybe Chat GPT, let's just describe it as that, one of the killer applications of the technology, it's not going to be accurate. And it will, quote unquote, confabulate or hallucinate. And therefore, when it is speaking to a young adult, a lawyer, to my CFO, and it's giving advice to those audiences, every audience has to take it with a grain of salt and almost think of it as a child, in the sense that you're not going to take it as, you know, the truth. You're going to go fact check it. You're going to go use it to kind of ideate with, and it's directionally relevant. It's not specifically accurate, right?
That makes sense.
And plus, let's just take our kids. When you ask a challenging question to a kid and they want to act as if they're right, they may just state the answer as if it's truth.
Right.
And some adults do this too, right? So, but it's not. But they either tell you as if it's truth because they believe it's the best of their knowledge, and you might believe it because they sound so confident. Well, gosh, ChatGPT comes back with an answer in a very confident way, very factual way. But it's like a child, it doesn't have all the information. It's just asserting itself as if it does. You literally have to take it with a grain of salt, as if you're talking to your 5-year-old and say, hey, you know, let me go back with that and see, maybe I didn't read the Webster Dictionary on that definition and my child did. Well, ChatGPT has a plethora of information in this abstract world. Maybe it did give me the right answer. I better go check that. Oh, okay, this time the answer is right, versus, oh no, this is totally made up.
Yes. And you get lulled into complacency because it'll probably be right for 3 or 4 times. And then the one time it messes up and you're like, oh no. I was just doing that with one of my articles today. I was using ChatGPT to help me rewrite some of the articles. And I go back and check it against the original content and copyright checkers and things like that. And I'm like, ChatGPT, where did you get this information? Did I miss it in the original article? And he goes, oh, you're right. I was just, you know, inferring that these are some of the use cases based on the topic of the article. And I'm okay, we cannot assume anything. You know,
just the way you described that makes me reflect on any one of my 5 kids, right?
Yeah.
I think it's the same exchange. You know, you just have to keep pushing and say, is that true?
Yeah. Where did you get this information?
It's almost in the prompt engineering world, you almost have to say at the end of each prompt, you have to say, could you please check your work?
Oh, yeah. That's a great suggestion. Right. Yeah.
And give it a chance to go at it again and then maybe find its own errors.
That's a good idea. And you mentioned that the weaponization of AI through the autonomous drones and other military weapons, it's a growing concern. What type of malicious uses do you believe are the most likely to surface in the near future? And how can companies proactively defend against those threats?
Yeah, it's definitely another interesting area. I think the world of cyber warfare, okay, it's one where I have a little history. I used to manage a large team that was involved with every terrorist activity that you read about or watched the news about. Direct line into the president and every 3-letter agency. So I saw a lot of what you would see in the movies, which kind of informs me on what the art of the possible is. And in the end, my biggest message to anybody willing to listen is, when you're dealing with cyber warfare, the good guys have to have the same tools as the bad guys.
Yeah.
it's really everybody has the same weapons in order to have an equal battle. And then what wins is how quick you are, how smart your team is in using those tools. And maybe you're just a little bit ahead of the latest and greatest. And so weaponization of AI is definitely going to be one where you can amplify cyber warfare. You can amplify disinformation. You can really up the game on societal manipulation, I think.
Yeah.
And that's where nation states, activities can really be an issue. I think a lot of folks worry about, some of the other bigger world powers that are using AI to sabotage global supply chains, and dominate industries. And I think expertise now is going to be developed in the areas of deep fake and propaganda.
Yeah.
That definitely dismantle trust in large institutions. And while unchecked, even surveillance using AI under world leaders could fuel civil unrest if used inappropriately. So this is a real area of issue, I think, where malicious applications could definitely be used to destabilize economies, erode the societal cohesion, and really make what's prolific in digital communication entirely untrustworthy.
Yeah.
And that, in simple terms, leaves democracies vulnerable to just this adversarial exploitation that I think is truly real. And I don't say it lightly, having had exposure to this and protecting Homeland myself with my team. So how do you fight this?
Yeah.
Well, you literally have to put the power of the technology in the hands of our own military in a way where your sole purpose is to do good, and really use that power. In state-sponsored actors could use AI to thwart these hackers, these infiltrations, these supply chain sabotagers,
Yeah.
by just being ahead or at least at parity. I mean, I think it's fundamentally that is the answer. Yeah. I mean, I think there are a lot of things you can do with the rise of AI generated deepfakes and propaganda. So you're going to have to also have industry get really good at identifying. And I think just like we've had in the past with media, where you're trying to protect copyright and you have music and film distribution being really hard for companies to manage because there's a lot of copy and there's a lot of theft. There's derivative works, just like you've got a ton of industry that's been built around protecting people's original content. You're going to have the same in the world of AI. So if it's AI training data, we're going to have to protect the use of the data used to train. So if someone says, I don't want my data as part of the training set, then we're going to have to govern that. And then once it's allowed to be used, then the derivatives have to be essentially labeled. This is a derivative of these 3 pieces of original work. And that's going to be hard. But if and when accomplished, then you can start to digitally fingerprint where information comes from. And then you can determine whether you want to trust it. So when you digital fingerprint something, you can also define its sources. And so I read news from a smaller property versus the Wall Street Journal. I may have a different opinion on whether I trust it or not. Same thing in terms of if it's information, if it's digitally fingerprinted and it came from these 3 not so trusted sources versus these 3 that are, I may be more inclined to support the derivative work itself.
Right.
I think that's going to become very important. So those are a couple ideas for you.
I like that. Do you think that our government is doing enough to protect the misuse of information through cyber warfare and things like that? Or do you think they're just fighting amongst themselves and nothing's getting done? That's my concern.
Yeah, I mean, I think I can definitely paint the picture of any suite of politicians, whether it's, red or blue, you could argue are somewhat driven by wealth or power and being able to support things that increase those. And so you could present this as a negative in terms of well, we're just going to let AI run its course because it's going to put more money in my pocket or
Yeah.
allow me to stay in my powerful position longer, or maybe even rise in my power. So there's definitely that, I think, concern. But we do have plenty of agencies and folks that are working on regulations, like the AI Act in the
Mm.
EU is a great example, and a lot of developments similar that essentially create the frameworks that we need in order to govern.
Mhm.
And I think after one or more of those are really embraced globally, now you're going to have, again, technology kind of coming to bear where the AI governance becomes a focus.
Yeah.
And the same power of the AI itself you use similar to govern it. It's kind of like, well, I'm going to use AI to govern AI almost. We laugh at that, but it's true. You're going to have something that's as good as the thing you're governing
That's
in
true.
order to keep it under control. So what's going to happen here now that AI has become so understandably powerful,
Hmm.
we're going to see a lot of companies begin to build in governance solutions that are just as interesting in the use of the AI itself. So that's my prediction.
Yeah.
And I think, is that there today? No. So will it be a 2025 focus? Absolutely.
Yeah,
And
I would hope so, especially since Sam Altman thinks that AGI is going to happen next year. So
yeah,
let's chip, chop, chip.
yeah, no, I'm a technologist through and through from the time I had my first remote control car at the age of 5, became a EECS engineer, and I have a lot of that in my DNA. So that's what gets me up every morning. That's why I'm a CEO of a tech company,
Hmm.
and all previous ones before that. I love it, and I think it can be really used for good.
Yeah.
But with that being said, there is definitely going to be some needed governance. But as we watch things evolve under Sam's predictions, and he's the closest to it in OpenAI, obviously. I think we came from an era where everything was manual. Let's kind of call it the pre-AI era.
Yeah.
And then we used AI as a tool. And I grew up in that world where you're kind of using it for decision support. You're kind of using it to support your decisions,
Hmm.
a lot more analytical, but it's not even that sophisticated. I
Hmm.
think where we are today, I'll call it the co-pilot model. It's a term everybody's read or seen,
Yeah.
but it's essentially the humans in the loop. And
Hmm.
it's more than the humans in the loop. Human is driving. The AI is just the co-pilot, but the pilot who's flying the plane is the human.
Hmm.
And that's where you get the checks and balances with the human leading first, the AI leading, following second. Where I think we're headed next is the shared control model.
Yeah.
I'll just keep it simple. It's an adaptive autonomy. It's where there's things happening in real time and the human's still in the loop. It's just that there's now more going on with the AI, and it's like having two pilots, but if one gets out of control, the other one can take over.
That's good.
And that's still a little scary, but that's where I think where some of the applications are or leading to. Where Sam wants to take it is beyond that. It's a full autonomy model. It's
Yeah.
the pilot as the overseer, it's the pilot is the AI, and there is no second pilot, human co-pilot or no co-pilot, right? And that's the scary one, right? I think that one is not, it's not going to happen in the short term because, again, the AI is not accurate enough,
Hmm.
doesn't have access to real-time data, doesn't have controls over systems yet. But again, as you hear about where OpenAI is going, then we know we're on that journey and it could be pretty quick.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned that the loss of control and the weaponization, it could lead to the loss of consumer trust through different ethical and legal risks. How can AI companies balance innovation with ethical responsibility to maintain this trust while still driving progress?
Yeah, it's a simple answer, actually. From a consumer perspective, you first care about your own privacy, your own data protection. If you don't want people using your data, you better have the ability for that to be honored. I think the laws are there, and they're being tailored to AI-driven decision making. And so I think that's kind of where we are, and that's where it's going in more and more in terms of an enforcement perspective.
Mhm.
So now we have to kind of segue into, okay, we've seen things like the AI Act. We're evolving GDPR in its interpretation around AI. And now we've got to enforce it. So we go from ethical guidelines on AI bias, on discrimination, on misinformation to credible penalties, right?
Right.
We have to see people actually being penalized for misuse against the consumer, and that gives consumer trust, to say
Right.
it's not just against the law to do this, but people are actually being brought, up against the law and
Mhm.
being held accountable. And then I think the other key thing, which is not happening yet, but will, is not just promoting transparency and explainability, but allowing customers the ability to know the details. And that means like how the AI made its decision. So, for example, there's plenty of examples like this, but to give you one, you're going to go and apply for a car or home loan and you get turned down.
Right.
Do the credit agencies or loan provider, mortgage broker, do they tell you why? Typically, they do, right?
Mhm.
And it's explainable. If you incorporate AI and it makes those type of decisions and says, I don't think you should be qualified for this home loan. Well, it better be able to explain with as much detail as anything else that's deterministic, that's human generated. If it's AI generated, I want to know. I want to have transparency over how it made
For
that
sure.
decision,
Oh,
right?
for
And
sure.
so,
Yeah.
so those things would give consumers trust, right? Enforce my privacy, my data protection, give me transparency, explain to me how and why it's doing what it's doing to the level where I can trust it. And then I
Yeah.
think we're in good shape, right?
Yeah.
And then one thing that's kind of pertains to your industry, if I do read something, I want to know the sources
Yeah.
so I can determine whether I value that content like I should. So if it's made up, obviously, I'm going to treat it as valuable as I do if my 5-year-old gives me, the summary of the AI Act. I'm
Yeah.
going to take it into consideration, but I most likely will read it myself. But if it's coming from a source and all the sources and they are valid, then I can, like anything, I can determine whether I consider it propaganda or fact.
Mhm. Now, how would you think a journalist should do that? Do you put the links to your sources at the bottom of an article, or how do you think that should happen?
Well, so we all have to annotate what clearly our own work. We have to enforce attribution and we need to enforce being able to show references for any content that's been AI generated. So the last one is the hardest one
Yeah.
because, I did mention earlier for anybody listening, watching, the current state of the art with transformers is not inherently developed well to tell you what the exact data is. It's just meant to give you generalizations. So
Mhm.
sometimes it might not even give you the source in a proper way or all the sources. And so until we can get to the point where anything that's AI generated has all the things that were used to create it, we're going to be scratching our head a bit. And that's what's hard. We, at best today, can say, here's every source of data used to train. So that would be the starting point. Here's the original training set. So then I can go back and determine whether I believe in that training set. And then here's the source of data that's been used to fine tune it. And then here's the source of data that has been introduced in real time
Mhm.
as part of the tailoring of the response, the answer to the query. If I don't know all three of those things, and I don't know truly what was used to create the derivative that I'm
Mhm.
viewing, reading, watching. And so I think this is the hard part of the current
Yeah.
technology. It doesn't exist yet.
I'm just thinking, wow, that's going to be a huge shift because I do already put a little thing at the bottom of my article saying that ChatGPT helped me rewrite the articles, so I'm transparent in that, ChatGPT is doing it and then I'm looking it over, and I always double check it with copyright checkers, and then I check it against the article itself that I found, and then I always make sure I go to reputable sources when I'm generating the news. So I know I'm doing my part, but I know I could do a lot more in terms of the transparency.
For all media, your best disclosure would be I use ChatGPT to, as an editing
Yeah.
tool, not as a source of information, but more of an
Right.
editing tool, right?
Okay. That's a good point.
All the information came from me. I'm just using it to write it differently, right?
Yes.
And I
Yeah.
think that for a reader would be like, okay, I'm there because I'm going to
Oh,
look at Lisha's sources, and I've read her works with and without ChatGPT, and I love this. And
mhm.
the second you say ChatGPT contributed to some of the actual content is when I think the audience who is knowledgeable of the technology would go, discount. And
Yeah.
others would just believe that it's all as good as anything coming from a human, which they can't.
Yeah. That's
Right.
true. Okay. I'll need to double check my disclosure at the end of my article to make sure I say that.
There you go.
But I'm kind of going back to the first part of what you were saying, how the consumers would lose trust if there's not transparency. You don't know why you're being turned down for a loan. Well, it's current events. It's happening in real time because the United Healthcare used AI to turn down 32% of its coverages for people. And as a person who would need medical care, I would want to know why I'm also being turned down for healthcare coverage as well, because it's supposed to be there. You pay this premium every month. It's supposed to be there. And then all of a sudden it's not, just because you're old or, whatever. And
Yeah.
I don't like those ideas.
Yeah. And to be honest with you, there's very large, successful companies that have used legacy technologies that are similar to this genre of transformer.
Mm.
The neural net technologies of the past are black boxes, and they've been used to predict whether somebody is a good, candidate for a loan or a good life expectancy for a life insurance policy, or,
Right.
the right treatment candidate for a particular therapy. And so there's been a lot of kind of traditional, recursive neural net solutions that we've relied on as an industry in the past, and they're black boxes in the sense that you can't explain what that technology or how it made its decision other than fundamentally describing how it works. I put data of a bunch of people who were bad loan candidates, and I know because they defaulted.
Right.
And I use that to train the black box to say, if anything looks like this, say bad candidate on the output. And that's all you have. The black box itself are a bunch of, mathematical weights and multiple levels of recursive neural net technology capabilities that sit in that. And you just know that these inputs resulted in this output, and therefore I'm going to classify you or put you in the same group of bad candidate, and I'm going to go,
Yeah.
and that's the best I can do. It's similar, but now it's at scale. And it's being applied in so many different use cases in its current cloud-enabled capability, which is the biggest differentiator amongst a handful. This is cloud powered. This is something where we can take this technology and do it and apply it at horizontal scale, meaning any industry, any application can now weave this in. And so with that, we've moved that black box model into everything, which should make end consumers much more uneasy because we're proliferating this issue of black box.
I see.
And creating more ethical and legal risks behind that.
Right. Wow. Lots to think about. I hope other people are thinking about this too. And kind of shifting gears a little bit, Conversica has been pioneering conversational AI. Can you share specific actions that your company is taking to mitigate these risks and set an example for the industry?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the segue from the last talk track is we've been
Hmm.
thinking about this quite a bit, and maybe in a position where we're slightly ahead of people from the perspective of our particular use cases have forced us
Hmm.
to think about this differently. And what I mean by that is if you give a child a simple task, then they're going to have a higher probability of succeeding versus a complex task. And the
Right.
AI is, from my perspective, similar to that.
Hmm.
If you give Gen AI a simple question and there's just an answer, that's a question answer. It's a single step, and you're just kind of drawing on the training set and the fine tuning and what's in the prompt, and you're using that to answer a question
Hmm.
versus I want you to guide a person through a complex process of discovery, consideration, ultimately buying, business to business solution that has so many different aspects to it. And as a buyer, I'm kind of going through a buyer's journey that's super complex, and it may take me 20, 30, 50 steps to get
Yeah.
from start to finish. That's a complex process. That's not a question answer.
Right.
That's a whole sequence of steps. And so we've had to think about the sequence of steps in
Hmm.
complex buyer journeys because Conversica helps our clients sell more products and services using AI. So
Hmm.
you naturally go, well, if the AI is so inaccurate, and it can't even do a question answer, with high accuracy, how do you expect it to take 10, 20, 50 steps,
Right.
not have a compounding error that
Hmm.
occurs, right? It's kind of like if you go to a dinner party and you tell a story and then you have that story told 10 times and then you listen to the 10th person, it's like, it's
Way
not even what
different.
we started with, right?
Yeah.
In our world, that would mean you'd start off selling complex enterprise software. And if you gave the AI full control of the complex process, you'd finish selling strawberries.
Oh no. Yeah.
It just gets off track. So many people have been putting too much weight on large language models,
Hmm.
and they're going to get themselves in trouble. And that's the trough of disillusionment that we're heading for. Conversica has decided, for good reason, to never give Gen AI, transformer models, full reasoning control.
Mm.
It's not, we're not allowing the AI to determine what the next step needs to be.
Right.
We
Okay.
define all the steps. As humans, we know what the best practice is to qualifying a potential buyer, for
Right.
example. Why would I try to have the AI envision a different sequence of steps to qualify a prospect buyer for enterprise database software, for example,
Hmm.
or to sell new businesses connectivity solutions, or buy new credit processing, offers. Whether you're the largest credit provider in the world or the largest communication company in the world, or any industry vertical where you're over $1 billion in revenue, you will not agree to putting kind of the decision making into the hands of the AI. And we
Hmm.
embrace that and kind of have brought to market a solution where we selectively allow the transformer or Gen AI capabilities to help us, like you do, in crafting the message,
Hmm.
right? But not owning the message itself.
Right.
Our brands own the message of their brands. So we've literally created a system where we can provide 100% brand safety because we're controlling the message, that the information that's being used. We're only allowing the technology to take that and craft a different way of using that information and making it sound better. So
Hmm.
in conversational responses, it sounds brilliant, but it's also brand safe.
I love that.
And that we guarantee.
Hmm.
So we can get the largest companies on the planet, which is what we're focused on, we can give them that feeling of ChatGPT, but without any of the brand, hurting hallucinations or misrepresentations. And that's the difference between us and somebody just putting an application on top of ChatGPT's APIs.
Exactly. Do you think addressing these risks requires collaboration across the AI industry? And if so, what kind of partnerships or industry standards would you like to see happen?
Yeah, so the quick answer is absolutely. I think all the brains around the table, which this is a global table now,
Hmm.
given the proliferation of the technology in the cloud, it's at the fingertips of any coder in any corner of the world. So now you have the smartest minds that are not just congregated in Silicon Valley, for example.
Right.
So now collaboration becomes even more important. And I think the smartest who care about making the technology better for good need to come together. And I
Hmm.
think the collective can first do what we just talked about, which is help build technology to enforce what
Hmm.
we already know works in terms
Right.
of protecting the end consumer and protecting the clients that service them. So I think there's just going to be a lot more that's going to pop up in what I'll call AI governance. And I think every smart group that cares about, whatever they represent, whether it's personal or a business they work for, cares about that, that come to the table and help us, further define it, further create technologies to put it into action. And I think in the next 2 years, great things are going to happen on power delivery to support the use of AI and everything. More advancements from Sam and others
Hmm.
in the core technology itself. And I think the transformer is going to be replaced by the next generation.
Wow.
And then ultimately the governance that wraps around it to make sure it's all safe.
Mhm. What role do you think governments and regulators should play in mitigating the risks? Are there specific areas where more action is needed? And everybody's talking about the balance in between innovation and safety, but I'm a little bit of a cynic. So, what's going to stop them from doing that because they just want more money for themselves?
Yeah, that's true. It's a hard question to answer. I do
Yeah.
think there's some obvious, potential issues in governments embracing of the AI technology in such a way that we maybe take some of the regulations off the table, or we
Hmm.
make it easier to apply the technology in ways that benefit deeper, bigger pockets.
Hmm.
So I do think that there is a clear conflict of interest,
Yeah.
and that could fuel, I think, the misuse, even here in the US, that naturally anybody who appreciates this technology would be hard to say differently. And
Yeah.
so I think how do we how do we protect ourselves? I think it's, the power of the population and its ability to speak,
Hmm.
digitally
Hmm.
is going to be important. We can't give a voice is unequal. Obviously, we got to give a
Right.
voice to everybody who fears or gets impacted in ways that are real.
Hmm.
I think Be Vocal is going to be a good start, I think,
Okay.
to help govern the administrations that misuse, for sure, in any government around the world. But outside of that, it's going to be just more and more technologists really creating something that even the governments can't disintermediate,
Hmm.
at the end of the day. This is going to come back to a lot of good money being put into a lot of neat startups and a lot of neat projects within big companies to develop technology that really wrap around this breakthrough in a way that protects us
Hmm.
is going to be the way it has to go.
I think you're right. Yeah. You just have to believe that the good people will win out in the end.
I mean, again, if we starve investments in good, which we don't, I mean, here in
Hmm.
Silicon Valley, private equity and venture capital has invested considerable amount. You look at how much just went into OpenAI over the last several years, 22
Right.
billion being invested. It's not a lack of capital.
Hmm.
I think capital markets are there to invest in things that make sense from a business perspective. So take my thoughts here in terms of, well, governance is going to be pretty important to the general population. Therefore, I
Yeah.
think value around that's going to be created, and therefore investment dollars will follow it. So I think that's my prediction for 2025 and beyond, is a lot more in AI governance.
I like that. And I think too, once more of the general public interacts with AI, even the generative AI, and sees the impact that that's having on their daily lives, I think maybe they will start speaking up. Because some of the people I know, they just see the fear in AI and they don't see an upside because they haven't even used it and they don't know how transformative it can be in your work and things like that. So I'm hoping that once more people start using it, they will start speaking up and letting their representatives know, hey, this isn't cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's always a two-sided coin, and I can't tell you if the politicians are going to take the regulations off the table
Mm-hmm.
to fill pockets, or if they're going to feel fearful and put too much regulation
Right. Yeah, that's another
that
problem.
will stall innovation. This is the natural fight and balance that I think occurs. Legislating and enforcing standards was clearly where we kind of pass laws and regulations to enforce this kind of ethical use, safeguard privacy and ultimately hold parties accountable. We have a history for it, so we should see some of that. I think investing in oversight and compliance, like I just said, is going to give these governments, regulatory bodies, the ability to inspect, to audit, and ultimately oversee AI implementations such that we're ensuring adherence to the rules. And then I think with people like you, we're promoting transparency and public trust through just keeping people aware of what's happening.
Yeah,
I think
that's our goal.
combination, right?
Yep. Well, before we wrap up, I'd like to ask a couple of lighter questions so our audience can get to know you a little better. When you do step away from your work, what are some activities or hobbies that you're passionate about?
Yeah, thanks for that. Number one on my top of my list is big wave surfing. So,
Oh,
the
fun.
largest waves my body can handle and places that I can afford to travel to in terms of time. So, I'm a big surfer and I've surfed all over the world.
Nice.
Second to that is extreme skiing. So, I like to go off trail and in
Oh,
between trees in steep places with lots of deep powder. So anybody listening that loves that will understand, and I'm a big sailor. So I like to go where my boat, my
hmm,
sloop and wind can take me. I've done a lot around the world. I'm an international sailor.
fun.
And ultimately, I do like to be in the outdoors. So just
Mhm.
backpacking and trekking in some of the weirdest places like the Balian Valley of Irian Jaya, next to Papua New Guinea in the jungle.
Mhm.
I like places that are kind of off the beaten path. But generally speaking, I work hard, play hard.
Yep.
So, I've got lots of stories in the workplace and I have a lot of stories outside of the workplace. So
Yep.
kind of balance it out, right?
That's great. Yeah, you need balance. And finally, what piece of advice would you give to AI leaders and companies who are wanting to make a meaningful impact while navigating the challenges in this rapidly evolving industry?
Yeah, it's a great question. And there's a lot of smart peers, CEOs heading up companies and incorporating AI. I think some people believe that their competitive advantage is keeping secrets
Hmm.
around how they're implementing. I kind of take the opposite approach. Be vocal about how you're applying, use it to spread the word and share and maybe accelerate faster. I even collaborative with my competitors. So I call it
Hmm.
cooperation or competitive cooperation. And I think with that has always given me a lot of good things. So
Hmm.
I would ask everybody to consider getting more out in the public with all of us and tell us how it's working well and how it's not.
Hmm.
And we can combine that and get a little bit more lift faster that benefits the end customer, our clients, I think, that are using our products and services.
That's great advice. Well, thank you so much, Jim, for joining us today and sharing your insights. It's been a real pleasure talking with you and learning more about your work at Conversica. And for those listening, if to learn more about Conversica, you can visit their website, conversica.com.
All
Keeping
right.
you connected to tomorrow today, this is Alicia with AInews.com.